Beloved, in the midst of transition and in the midst of change of season, one always needs to constantly remain focused in their disposition. It's going to be vitally important when you understand the change of God, what was to what now is, and what God is preparing to bring. And it's going to be important that you and I have a clear perspective, but most of all, keep clear focus on what is required of us as believers. Join me today as we unpack an important topic which I believe will be life-changing to you, that instead of fearing, it's important now to start stirring. The Lockdown Connect. I'm Dr. Sherwin, and I think one of the most important things that you and I are facing right now and need to have clear focus on in terms of our responsibility is what is happening in the seasons that we're finding ourselves in. And we've really been discussing a couple of things, that our ability to see beyond the obvious, understanding what is required from us in our endurance in where we're all finding ourselves in terms of a global pandemic. But I think greatly so is that there are important things that you and I as a new creation believer needs to unpack in this time and in this phase that we're finding ourselves in on the prophetic timeline. And so I want to share with you, beloved, a couple of important things and these words that the Apostle Paul shares with Timothy in terms of encouraging him during a time of testing that he's facing. And 2 Timothy chapter 1 verses 6 to 7 reads as follows. It says, "Therefore I remind you to stir up the gift of God which is in you through the laying on of my hands. For God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and of a sound mind." Now, there's always a sense of uncertainty when you're journeying through a place of the unknown. And so the Apostle Paul, with his immediate purpose of writing this letter to Timothy, had an affectionate appeal to Timothy to come and see him, but obviously realized that that would not be possible. And so, however, Paul then maintains his concern and his welfare for the church that he has entrusted in the care of Timothy, that he continues pressing on in the assignment that Timothy has been given. And so with the realization that Paul's death was imminent, Paul's preoccupation was with the gospel and the expression of that through Timothy, that the work continually expands, increases, and mobilizes. And so the letter urges Timothy to be faithful in facing hardship in the midst of it and in the midst of opposition. And so it becomes a very significant moment that you and I read in the scriptures with Paul's engagement with Timothy. And we soon realize that as Paul is seeing his way out of life, Timothy is being handed over the baton and to continue the great work that Paul has planted and laid. And so we begin to see here, beloved, that there is an ending of an old and an entrance of the new. And so Paul really represents the passing of what was, and Timothy represents the entrance of what is and what is to come. The Apostle Paul, he represents the exit of the old, and Timothy represents the entrance of the new. Paul represents the handing over, while Timothy represents the receiving of. And so when there's a change in season, there's always going to be a change in expression. When there's a change in season, there's always going to be a change in expression. And so the Apostle Paul gives Timothy a clear instruction in the midst of all that is happening. And he says clearly, "Therefore I remind you to stir up the gift of God which is in you through the laying of my hands." And so there needs to then be, Timothy, a stirring, a rekindling, that in everything that is taking place, the transition in season, there has to be a continuous stirring on the inside of you of the gift that is given to you but which is now abiding in you by the laying of my hands. There needs to be a stirring. And so ultimately, Timothy, you need to rekindle the fire that is on the inside of you, which is set for your assignment. And so in this time of transition that's taking place, of what was to where we are now and what we're about to step into, it's going to be vitally important for you and I to stir the gift, the rekindling of the gift, the fire that needs to continually be burning on the inside of us, because this is going to be necessary in order for us to operate effectively in the gift that is abiding on the inside of us. And so we shouldn't allow the fire to dwindle down on the inside of us, but we have the responsibility to be keeping it burning by rekindling it. And so the gift then that needs to be rekindled, the charisma, which is broken down in two words, the chara, which is the joy and the cheerfulness, and the charis, which is the grace, the goodwill and undeserved favor. The gift of grace, which is especially used to designate the gifts of the Spirit, is now operating on the inside of you. Now, 1 Peter chapter 4 verses 10 to 11 says it this way. It says, as each one has received the gift, the charisma, minister it to one another as good stewards. Now, if we need to minister the gift, the charisma that is on the inside of us as good stewards, you and I have the responsibility then to express it the way God has intended for us to express it. And the word stewards there is a Greek word called koinosmos, which represents and really means that you are a manager. And so, beloved, you and I have the responsibility to manage the gift that is on the inside of us by administrating it from one to another. And so that is our responsibility in this time and in this season. And it says, for the manifold grace of God, if anyone speaks, let him speak as the oracles of God. If anyone ministers, let him do it with the ability which God supplies, that in all things God may be glorified through Jesus Christ, to whom belong the glory and the dominion forever and ever. And so you and I have then the responsibility to administer this gift. And this is essentially what Paul was telling Timothy, that the gift on the inside of you, the charisma, you are now a steward. You need to become a good steward of that. You need to be able to administer that in the assignment that God has pathed out for you. And so you need to then stir it up. And then he goes on to, and let me just break it up this way, that when we're talking about gifts, there are three essential things that you and I need to always be cognizant about. That when we're dealing with the gifts that is being given to us by God, that is abiding on the inside of us, and we have perspective of becoming good stewards of those gifts. Number one, the important thing for us to understand that divine gifts are moral equipment for his highest service. And so while we are here on earth and we are administering the gifts that has been given to us by the Spirit, it's ultimately for his highest service. And so we can never get the glory out of it, because through operation of the gifting that is abiding on us, through the restirring and the rekindling, always gives glory back to God. So number one, divine gifts are moral equipments or moral tools here on earth for his highest service. Number two, the possession of the divine gift involves our responsibility to use it. And so you and I have the responsibility to begin to express the gift. Now, gifts differ from one to another. Everyone has a different gifting, but everybody has the responsibility of becoming good stewards of that gifting, of the manifold grace of God, and allowing it to minister to one another through the gifting that God has given us. And so now Timothy has been given this responsibility, and he is reminded about it. And number three, we need to understand that we need to stimulate the gift with a continuous renewal of zeal, that you should never allow the fire to dwindle, but it should always be rekindled and burning, because the gift on the inside of you that has been placed on the inside of you is necessary for expression. God will never give you a gift to be dormant. Gifts are always there to be expressed. And so when we understand that, then the unction and the moving of the Spirit will always come through our part of action. When you want to see unction, then we need to act. So unction and action go together. They are intertwined. They operate as one. And so he tells Timothy, stir up the gift which is on the inside of you through the laying of my hands. For God has not given you a spirit of fear. And so, Timothy, while you are expressing this gift, you need to express it with the understanding that you're going to be doing this thing through boldness, because God has not given you a spirit of fear. And so for this reason, to express what is for the now, God hasn't given you the spirit of fear. But anytime you are stirring the gift, every time you're operating in the gift, boldness arises on the inside of you. And so it tells Timothy, when you're going to express this gift, when you're going to operate in this gift, you don't have to worry about fear of operating on it, in expressing in it, because God hasn't given you the spirit of fear, but God has given you the spirit of power, which is the dunamis, the might, the force, the great ability to exercise the gift. But not only that, he's backed it out with love, and love is added as it shows what the servant of God always needs to do in power, in conjunction with the power of God, in terms of executing the way love requires us to execute it. But he also says, I've given you power, I'm backing it up with love, but I'm also giving you a sound mind, which is the sophronosmos, which means that you will have safe thinking, means that you will have a good judgment, but most of all, you will have the right actions to operate the way it has been intended and purposed for you to operate in this season and in this moment. And so, Timothy, I'm charging you to stir up the gift that's on the inside of you, and God has not given you the spirit of fear as a backing, but as God has given you power as a backing, God has given you love as a backing, and God has given you a sound mind as a backing. And so when you operate in this, you're operating in the time of transition, in the time of what was to what is and what is to come. There will be a clear focus and a responsibility on your behalf to express the way God is allowing you and expecting you to express the gift, the charisma on the inside of you. And so when the gift that is hiding on the inside of you is stirred, you'll begin to express it the way God has intended and purposed for you to always express it. There is a boldness of act that is rising on the inside of you. You are no longer operating in your ability, but in the ability which God supplies. And so when you begin to express, people of God, when you begin to express the gifting on the inside of you, you will do it with the power that's expressed through you. You'll do it with the love through compassion, but you'll do it with a sound mind, which gives you the clear perspective. And so just as the Apostle Paul urges Timothy to be faithful in the midst of hardship, and we're all facing hardship right now, we're all going through tremendous testing as we're dealing with the lockdown, the pandemic, it's important for us to understand that instead of fearing in this season, we should begin to start stirring, because that gift that is on the inside of you needs to operate in this season. And so in the midst of the exchanging of seasons and mantles, what is passing away of and what is becoming the new, the change of what used to be to now adjusting to what has become the now, what was now refined of the past, and the defining of what was is now giving you perspective of what has now become the new. So I want to take this opportunity to comfort you that just like Paul tells Timothy, as we see the change of God, the change of season, of a passing of the old and the entrance of the new, that this is not the time to be fearing, but this is a complete opportunity for us to start stirring. And so I want to really encourage you, people of God, saints of God, that begin to stir the gift on the inside of you. Begin to work the gift. If God has given you the gift to be a blessing to someone, be a blessing to someone. If God has given you the gift to smile, smile. If God has given you the gift to sow into someone's life, sow into someone's life. If God has given you the gift to pray, pray. If God has given you the gift to be an encouragement through exhortation, be that encouragement to exhortation through any medium necessary. But this is an opportunity for the church of God to begin to express, to begin stirring, rekindling the gift on the inside of them. And let us begin to show that in the change of season, in the change of mantles, in the change of transition, you and I are maintaining our focus, that we are not fearing, but we are stirring. So beloved, with this very important and famous words, Apostle Paul tells Timothy, and I charge you in concluding the matter, that therefore I remind you to stir up the gift of God which is on the inside of you through the laying of my hands. For God has not given you the spirit of fear, but has given you the spirit He's given you a spirit of power, the dunamis, of love, and of a sound mind. So let's begin to start stirring. Let's begin to start expressing. And let God begin to start using us the way He has purposed and intended to. Blessings to you.